What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Shantavia Show, where my goal is to help you start a business based on your life's vision. This ain't gonna be your daddy's business advice. I'm laser focused on entrepreneurship in the 21st century, vision, and breaking the traditional mold. If you can get with that, you can get with me. Be sure to visit shantavia.com for more episodes, blog posts, and other content. Thank you for listening. The show starts now. What's up, everybody? I'm Shantavia Johnson, and this is another episode of the Shantavia Show, where I want to inspire you to build a brand, business, and life that you love. And I'm excited to have with me again Harold Hughes. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So Harold and I were talking in a previous episode, which I will drop a link in the show notes so you can check out. And as he was talking, it made me think that he's got this awesome experience with hiring employees, which is a common question for people who are new entrepreneurs. So
Right.
he was gracious enough to stick around for another episode so we could talk about hiring. And I should have thought about this before because I follow Harold on Twitter, and he was recently adding a new person to his team and created a thread that got a ton of interest around, hiring as a startup founder and all the ins and outs and ups and downs of what that looks like. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Harold, then we'll talk about hiring practices when you are a startup, a relatively new company. Well, you're not relatively new, but...
Yeah, but still tips and tricks that
hiring.
we should use as startups.
Yeah. As entrepreneurs, startups out here trying to make it.
Trying to make it.
So Harold is the founder and CEO of Bandwagon Fanclub Inc. Before starting Bandwagon, Harold had a depth of experience for about a decade in corporate America. Harold is highly successful as an entrepreneur. He's been through some of the most prestigious institutes and accelerators in the country, including the IBM Blockchain Accelerator, the Founder Institute, and the Capital Factory Accelerator. Harold is committed to helping other people. You mentor women, people of color who are founding companies. Harold is also a husband and father. His son has his face, as I have learned watching him on Twitter for a while. And we're going to talk about hiring.
Let's talk about it.
Awesome. So tell folks about your company and the size of it and how many employees you currently have.
Yeah, so Bandwagon was started in 2014, right as I finished my MBA. And I actually went full-time in 2016. So January 2016, I started full-time. And that was just me, and we started to add more team members. At a high level, we help event organizers, whether that's a sports team or a festival, know which fans are in the venue on the day of the event. Why is that important? Well, there's two main reasons. Number one is that if they don't know that you're there, the marketing, the sponsorships, all of that's generic. And so you end up having a miss, which affects their bottom line and their ability to provide products and services that are of your interest. But number two, if they don't know you're there, it leads to ticket fraud. One of the things that we've seen is that you won't be able to get into a venue sometimes because a ticket's been sold multiple times. And that's because, surprisingly, most people, none of these ticket companies really talk to each other. And so what we've been able to do is build a solution that allows the ticket companies to communicate with each other in a way that protects their information while also helping the event organizer know which fans are there. So our big goal is to help create better community in these live events, create these once-in-a-lifetime experiences that get people out of their homes, out of their homogenous circles, and into really a group that will allow them to meet some people that share similar interests. And I think that makes the entire community better.
Awesome. So if you did not hear the previous episode about Harold's company, about his experience with Bandwagon, you have to go listen. It is inspiring. It is transformational. If you're a person who's kind of working a full-time job or recently fired from a job and looking for that light at the end of the tunnel, you must go listen because Harold has done some amazing things and now has how many employees?
So now there are 4 of us full-time, and we're actually hiring 2 more part-time team members. Well, actually, they'll probably already be hired by the time you hear this.
Awesome.
We'll be a team of 6.
Awesome. So what team members do you have, and who did you start with? How did that go?
So in the beginning, I think it's really interesting. If you're an early stage entrepreneur, one of the biggest challenges that you deal with is funding because you need money to hire people. And so the flip side is what if you could get the people before you got the money? And so when we started, that was the first thing we did. So our earliest team members was a general player, essentially our COO, Samotria Holmes, and then we hired a general counsel, but also more so VP of brand, so like marketing with LaVonda Taylor. And for me, it was important to do 2 things. Number one, I needed an extra set of hands. So Sammy was doing everything I was doing, just helping double, getting the output done. With LaVonda, I was just not really great at marketing and branding. And so she was able to fill in a hole, which is important, I think, as an entrepreneur to understand where your weaknesses are. I was able to say, this is something I'm not strong at. LaVonda is. We should bring LaVonda in. And so those were two of our earliest team members in the business. And in the beginning, there was no tech involved. So as I told you today, Bandwagon's a fan identity company. We sell B2B, business to business. So we would go to a sports team or a festival and we'd work with them. In the beginning, in 2014, Bandwagon was actually a ticket marketplace like StubHub or Vivid Seats. You could go to our website, you could search for events, you could put in your credit card information and buy a ticket, or you could sell a ticket to a game that you weren't going to be able to make it to. But in the beginning, there was no tech. So I built the first version, the very first version of the company I built. It was basically like a Craigslist. You were able to say, this is the game that I'm interested in tickets for, or this is a game that I have tickets for that I'm willing to sell. I would then message back and forth with this person, buy the ticket from them, communicate to the buyer who actually wants it, how much they're willing to pay, and pick it up from the seller, drive it all across the state or city, deliver it, and that person would pay me in cash. That was in the beginning. So, it was really important for me to be able to do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I had to wonder if people actually cared about the product or service. In the beginning, we created that ticket marketplace to help fans protect home field advantage. So it was StubHub or Vivid Seats with a little button that said, sell to a fan of my own team. So these are fans who could have easily listed it on StubHub if they wanted, but they were willing to meet with a stranger, go back and forth communication, to make sure that the fan was going to be of their same team. And so we realized that if you're willing to do all that there must be a market for this. So that's step one. But step two was, by doing all that stuff manually, I was able to figure out what parts of the process needed to be automated first. And so once we realized, we need to have this to be digitally listed and all this other stuff, that's when we had to go out and find our first technologist. And so we ended up bringing on a software developer, and I said, hey, listen, how long would this take and how much do you think that would cost? And so he gave us the number, and I said, okay, well, based on that number, I can't afford it. Any number over $10, I couldn't afford, but I knew I couldn't afford it. And so I said, well, listen, here's the deal. I want to give you a deferred compensation package, and here's how I'd like to structure it. I want to award you 0.5% of your, half of your equity once you build us a beta, and I'll give you the other half once you get the full product, the product in market. And once you build that product, I'm going to go take that and I'm going to shop it and I'm going to go raise money. And once I raise money, I'm going to give you $10,000 if I raise $250,000. But if I raise $500,000, I'll give you $20,000 cash, which was great for him because he's able to say, okay, if I think it's going to take this long and I could get $10,000 or $20,000, it's just dividing out hours by money. Mm-hmm. This is a good deal. Plus you get the stock in the company. And so that's what I did. And so our early team was really just the four of us. And as we grew, things changed and we said, okay, we need to add in a marketing person, or LaVonda's going to work more on sponsorships and we're going to bring in a financial person to help us as we do fundraising. So it was really just thinking through the stages of the company and what we needed at the time to bring them on.
So are these full-time employees? Are they
I think the challenge with startup for me is that I think that the phrase full-time and part-time are tough because at the time, from 2014 to the beginning of 2016, I was working 50 and 60 hours on the company, but I had a day job. So most people would say that I wasn't full-time. But the hours that my team and I were putting in were in the high number. And so ultimately we were all unpaid during that time. And it was evenings and nights and mm-hmm. whether we put the hours in. So I think that, as you work through the distinction of full-time and part-time, I think that matters more when people are getting paid. And when they're not getting paid and it's just sweat equity, you're mm-hmm. just trying to make sure that jobs are getting done, tasks are getting accomplished, and that they're working really hard.
So how'd you convince the other two people to work for free? So you mentioned Sammy and LaVonda mm-hmm. and your engineer mm-hmm. who you gave mm-hmm. deferred compensation. Mm-hmm. How'd you convince the other two? Yeah,
so Sammy and LaVonda, theirs was different. They were both in financial positions that allowed them to have some flexibility. They were passionate about the mission of it. And it's one of those things where, as a software developer, and I think you see more of this now where there's so many people learning coding, there's such a such a wide market of people willing to pay you to build build something. Whereas if you're talking about a first-time COO like Sammy was, or a VP of brand strategy like Lavonda was, those weren't things that they could just go, instead of working at Bandwagon, just go and work at this other startup. And so they were using us essentially as a platform to launch themselves, as well as really back a product and a company they believed in. And so for them, it was a bit of a trade-off. We say, look, you're going to have equity in the company. When we have the opportunity to pay you, we will give you some money. But for now, we think that this could be a great two-way street. And ultimately, they probably did it more so out of the fact that we were good friends than anything. I'm sure there's some random person had the exact same idea. They may not have done all that they did. So I appreciate that they were willing to take that sacrifice with us.
And they were people you already knew and had relationships with. They were friends.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. When you think about startups, and these companies getting started, most people, their first employees or first team members are former coworkers or friends and family. And so Sammy and I had went to Clemson together, worked at ScanSource together. Lavonda and I went to Clemson together. And so it was really that opportunity for us.
So you've got a team of 4 now. At what point do you start paying them? How does that work?
So they were the first folks paid. I recently came on payroll, but for me, I knew that as the company scaled, so, we talked about in the beginning in 2014 through early 2016, we had deferred compensation person and then unpaid people. But once we got into, I would say, late 2017, it was me saying, you all, I want your full attention. I need you to know that you're going to get paid and that your work is being rewarded. And so that was where you go and raise money and say, okay, these salaries are going to be around $50,000 or $60,000 and $80,000, whatever the numbers were, to make sure you got talented people who could help us build it. And so that was really important to me, was that we got people who cared about what we were doing, but also understood that their work was going to be rewarded monetarily in the short term, but also they had stock options to be able to reap the rewards as the company, excels in the future.
Right. So you mentioned in the previous episode we did that you ultimately have raised about $2.5 million or so.
Yep.
So you have the resources to pay people now.
Correct. Yep.
And how many people did you say you have on your team?
Yeah. So right now we have 4 full-time and there's 2 part-time.
Okay. How do you find good people? So when you're at the point where you're hiring people who are full-time, quote unquote, how do you find good people?
I think the biggest thing is trying to decipher between when you're meeting a representative of that person. And this is something that happens on a first date or a job interview. You're getting the best version of that person, and it's really hard to decipher if this person is like this all the time or if they're their interview version. And that's not a bad thing. That's not to say that we all aren't putting our best foot forward in interviews, but it's important to try and figure out what the delta is between the interview person and the person you'd actually hire. And I think that some of the biggest hiring mistakes that we've made, or anyone that we've talked to about, has been you didn't notice how big the delta was between the person that you were interviewing and the person that actually showed up on the day for the work. And so for us, we've been able to say, let's find really talented people and eventually get them to work with us. I believe in constantly courting people. One of the folks that's working with us now, she used to work at StubHub, and I met her 3 years ago, and she didn't know who I was. But I was just like, oh, that'd be really dope, for this black woman who worked at StubHub, who's got her JD and has worked at Facebook. That would be awesome for her to work with us. But at the time, I knew that we weren't in the right position for her to be interested. So I stayed on her Twitter, I kept up with her, and randomly she reached out to me after seeing a thread that I wrote about hiring and said, hey, we should talk. I would love to learn a little bit more about what you're doing. And so I think that finding great people is part deciphering between, the people's representatives on social media or in interviews, but also being able to constantly court people that you seem to find as exceptional. And so I leverage my network a lot to say, okay, this person is doing really great. I wonder if they'd want to come and work with me. Early stage, whether it's an investor or a team member, they're betting on the founder. They've got to be interested in working with you and for you, because companies go out of business or companies run out of money. And so it's just well, why would a person take that type of instability? And it's because they are crazy enough to believe, the founder. And that's the story that you need to make sure you are putting yourself out there in that way that they feel excited to work with you.
Cool. So you followed this person on Twitter, you kept up with her, that kind of thing. So one day when you have the money, do you just reach out to her and say, hey, now here's the opportunity. You
Yeah.
mentioned she reached out to
Yeah,
you.
but that's
and
exactly
how
it.
went.
Yeah, I think it's important to say, look, I know that, and you kind of feel it out throughout the way. There's another person who we're really excited about at some point working with, and she's in a really great position at a really awesome company. And so we stay in touch, and you kind of figure out like what are the things they would want, and compensation, flexibility, remote work is obviously a big thing these days. And so being able to say, okay, like, I'm going to earmark this person as my top candidate. If I could get them, I would hire them.
Yeah.
And you're able to see them. And because it's not an official job interview process, you're able to see them when they lash out on Twitter. You're able to ask them ask people how they interact with them in real life. And this is a person that you can do gather a lot of data points on before you even get to that point. And so I think that that's the best way, is that you go and seek out the people. I mean, I was at some type of event, and I think the founder of TrueCar, I think it's Scott Page, said, as a CEO or as a founder, your most important job is finding the 5 to 6 most important people in your company. And in Ben Horowitz's new book, he talks about how important your culture is. If you mess up these hires, it's going to change the success rate of your business.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we've been really mindful of like, how do we get those people that we really, really want?
That's really smart.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. So do you ever do the alternative? So like the traditional kind of interview process where you put up a job post?
Oh, yeah.
And so how do you manage it then when you don't know those folks?
Yeah, and so that's what we had for these last two. So to give you the shape of the team, it's 2019 now, or whenever we started this process, it was down to myself and our CTO. So we promoted our blockchain specialist, Dr. Hampton Smith, to being CTO, and I was running all sales and investor relations. And so the two of us were there, and we said, okay, we need more engineers. So we're going to put out 2 hiring recs. In our first round, we got around 42 applicants. We're headquartered in Greenville, South Carolina. It's an entry-level software engineering position. And so we were just like, we don't know what we're going to get, but we're going to put it out there. And we tried to come up with like qualifications, and we tried to come up with like expectations, but it's a startup. And so you never know. Like part of it is like take out the trash every now and then. And so it was really interesting to try and think through like what it was that we were looking for. And so it was an incredible candidate pool, and we were able to go through that. And the top candidate that we had in that round was a self-taught developer. Literally, she had went to school for design, actually has her own business on the side where she does jewelry design, like handwriting. She can turn handwriting into jewelry.
Huh.
And so
that's really neat.
It's super cool. Like all of her gifts are probably just amazing.
Probably.
And so she's able to go teach herself to code, and went through Hampton's rigorous testing where we had a person who flat out 5 minutes into an interview said, I'm sorry, I can't do this, because of how challenging some of the activities were. And, coding challenges or this and that. And so it was just really interesting to see that Brittany was able to say like, she equipped herself, and she was fantastic. And so, one of my favorite interview questions, and it threw Hampton off when I asked it the first time, but I'll ask people and I say, would you rather, if you had a choice, would you rather be king or rich? And it has nothing to do with you being a software engineer, but it helped me break up the monotony of how interview questions normally go. And it helped me understand how you thought. And so when the person says, I would rather be king, it's like, oh, well, why would you rather be king? Because you could easily say, oh, you'd rather be king because you want to set the rules. But you'd have some people say, I'd rather be king because I think that when you're king or you're royalty or whatever, or a politician, your job is to serve your community. And it is your job to protect them and to provide resources for them. And so that, and that helps you get insight into how they operate. Or when someone says, I'd rather be rich. Well, naturally, it's like, all right, well, I'm not going to be able to afford them. And you ask them why, and they say, well, I find that, you could have a lot of, if you're the king, you could make a lot of rules, but if you don't have the resources to provide the access or the opportunities for your people, you couldn't really go far. So if I'm rich, I think I could help more people. And so it leans into some of that. And so asking some of those different questions helped me kind of learn a little bit more about that person. I think that also when you think about the application process, we made sure to be extremely transparent. We said, hey, we're hiring one person in this round, and we want to pay them in between this number and that number. And we also said we're going to take this in 2 or 3 weeks. Like, we're going to move fast because we don't want to be holding you up from other opportunities, and we don't want to have a bunch of candidates on the hook trying to figure out if they're going to get the job. And so we were really clear about first application, you submit it, we reviewed half and said, okay, we'll talk to the first half on phone. Did those for 30 minutes. Next half, cut that and said, now we're going to talk to you on a video. Cut it in half again and said, we're going to do an on-site. Made an offer 2 days later, and we're able to get started.
Wow.
And so that was really important for me because I thought it was important to respect their time. We've all been on the other side of the application pool. And so that's really what our journey's been like. Like when you don't know them, you got to find ways to make them a little uncomfortable in the interview process to where they can't be so scripted. So you don't always have that representative. You're able to kind of go through that a little bit. And so I asked a bunch of different random questions. Like in the second second batch of interviews, we just hired Joe. The interview question that Brittany expected was the king or rich one, which I did ask. But I threw in another one. I said, hey, Joe, where do you keep your ketchup? Do you keep it in your fridge or do you keep it in the cabinet? And why do you keep it there? And this whole thing. And so, which is super interesting because no one on my team likes ketchup. So more for me, I guess. It's fine. But it's just interesting when you think through, like, how do you find a way to, again, how do you get from the representative that's in the candidate seat to the actual employee, and figuring out a way to minimize that delta, I think will, make your hiring process much better.
So you mentioned, you had a really fast timeline, 2-3 weeks at most.
3 weeks, yeah.
And you were respectful of that. What happens, and so this is kind of getting to your Twitter thread.
Sure.
What happens when you extend the offer to somebody and they accept it and then they change their minds? Yeah. How do you deal with all the ups and downs that go with humans?
Yeah, the tough part that's the tough part about humans and being a human is that your first thought is just like, man, this person just screwed me because I just told these other candidates that they didn't get the job. And so you're in a tough position, but you understand, the candidate is and should do what's best for them. I encourage everyone out here who's listening, number one, if you get a job offer, negotiate it, or do your best to. Some companies don't, respond to that, but ask for more because that changes the trajectory of how much you'll make over your lifetime. But also, it really just put us in a position where we're just like, man, that really sucks. Like, how do we fix this? And as we looked through, we had one person who turned us down and took a job at Salesforce. Well, if Bandwagon and Salesforce are looking at the same candidates, and we're at that point, I was like, we're probably doing the right things. But on top of that, I think the next thing is really just demonstrating grace throughout the process. Because of the way that we did our application process, we interviewed for competency and the skill sets early on. That was one of the first things that we decided through. And then as we got to know that person, we interviewed for culture fit. And so being able to think through how this person would fit in our culture, if our culture is button-ups and full suits and this person shows up with shaggy hair and jeans and torn t-shirt, it's like, okay, well, they probably don't fit. At the same time, if you're interviewing for a startup, I think the first thing you should do is look at our team page. And so then when you're setting your interview, it's going to be kind of weird when you come in with a full suit at our startup that's headquartered in a warehouse and we're in jeans and a t-shirt. So it's just things like that where we want to try and figure out ways to, connect with that person and really get to know them. But for example, in the situation you outlined, we had a candidate. We thought that he was the best candidate. He gave them the offer, top of the band that we were willing to pay. I think it's really important to set the number that you're willing to pay for a role because it makes sure that you stay in line with your budget and allows you not to have to reach too much for a candidate, especially entry level or junior level. And so gave them the offer, and they initially asked for more time. We gave 5 days, which I thought was a lot in the beginning. And I talked to people and I said, 3 days is normally pretty good. So we gave 5 initially. I was like, oh, I'm being generous. And the person said, well, can I have 2 more weeks? And at that point, I was like, man, this seems like a red flag. But if they're your top candidate, maybe you try and budge a little. And we said, well, we can't give you 2 weeks out of respect for the other candidates. We'll give you 2 extra days. So they had a total of a week. And, of course, we had other finalist candidates we hadn't notified yet. And we said, we'll let you know we're trying to finish the last of these interviews. And finally, the person accepts the job. So once they accept the job, I can say, okay, great, excited to have you. We're going to tell all the other candidates they didn't get the job. Great, you do that. And then 4 days later, that person says, hey, I know I accepted the job and signed the paperwork and looked at apartments. I'm not going to come. And so that does 2 things. Number one, it makes you reevaluate the process. What did you miss? The thing that we missed was obviously when the person asked for 2 weeks. That probably meant that they were waiting on another offer, which is what they were. But then the next, it just allowed us to go back and say, could we go back to someone that we told didn't have the job, and would they want to work with us? And that was probably my coolest moment of 2019 was being able to go back, and our guy's name is Joe, And, the way the timeline went was the candidate we had offered accepted the job on a Thursday. So I told Joe on Friday he didn't get the job via email and didn't hear from him. On Monday, Joe sends his email saying, hey, sorry for the delay. I really want to take time in my response so that I didn't come off as passive aggressive, which I thought was really thoughtful. He shared that he didn't have to, but he made sure to say, I really wish you all well. I was really excited to work with the company. He even told us during the interview that he made his first cover letter and his resume built to fit for our company. But he said, unfortunately, and I told him, I said in the rejection, I was like, hey, if we could have found a way to hire both of you, we would have. Like, you were awesome. And in his replying email said, unfortunately, there's no consolation prizes in job hunting. Like, either you get the job or you don't. And I could respect that. And he said, I hope things go great for you all. Really wishing you and the new hire great. Or I hope that things go terrible and you get to hire me before I get another job. And I was just like, that's pretty cheeky. I like that response. Sure enough, that next morning, Tuesday morning, the candidate that had accepted said, hey, we're not going to accept the job. I, took another job here. And I was like, well, talked to my CTO. I said, well, what do we do? And I said, we could go back to Joe and see if he would, take the job. And, went back and he said, yeah, absolutely. So we go back to Joe, offer him top of the band, great offer, and call him and said, hey, Joe, what are you up to? And he says, well, I'm working on some cover letters and all this other stuff. And I said, no, I understand, man. I don't want to take too much of your time. I really appreciate you spending time with us through our process, and also your note back. And he said, oh, I'm so glad. I wasn't sure if it was going to be, the wrong kind of wording. I was like, no, it was great. I thought it was fantastic. And I was like, but I want you to know, I think you really screwed us. And he's like, what? And I was like, yeah, because you sent that email on Monday, and Tuesday our candidate withdrew. And he's just like, you're kidding me. And I'm like, nope. So we're in a bit of a bind. And so I told him, I said, listen, the only reason you didn't get the job, as I told you in the initial rejection letter, was that this person edged you out on experience. And with startup experience and being able to move quickly is a value. And so that person was going to help us go a little faster. But from a culture fit, you were a slam dunk. And if that means that we've got to spend a little bit more time getting you the proper mentoring and any other resources, we think that would be a perfect investment for us to make sure you're on our team. So if you would have us, we'd love to offer you this position. I'll send you the formal paperwork. And all throughout that, he's just shouting, Yahoo! And interrupting me, which was fantastic. And so now he's started. He got all of his swag as a startup and is having a blast with us. Our CTO had set aside a week worth of stuff for him to do, and he's already taken care of it in the first 2 days. Oh, wow. And so we were able to see not only that the person did have the skill set, and probably more than we even initially evaluated, but number two, we've got a person who is bought in. This is a company that called him back when we said we would call him back if something changed, and did it quickly and respected of his time, and paid him a reasonable offer. And so I think that that's like how we've been able to handle this process so far in hiring.
No, that's awesome. So I was at your office earlier with you, and he was there, and the rest of your team. And could you, if you feel comfortable, talk a little about what his startup was or what you do for your new hires?
Yes.
Because I was impressed, actually, to see how you, as the CEO, as the responsible party for all these employees, bring new people on so that they are, like you mentioned, bought in and excited. And you probably have, a really amazing employee for however long he's with you because of this. So how do you treat your new hires?
Well, I think it's really important to surprise and delight. That's definitely super important. But, through the hiring process, it was really interesting because one of the candidates asked me, what is our culture? How do we define our company culture? Which is the first time we were asked that, and we don't have it like up on a wall somewhere. And so my first thought was, well, I can answer this, but you should probably hear from the other people who work on the team too. But I think that there's two things. Number one, we want to be I show grace, and I think it's important to demonstrate grace at every turn, and also to lean into the sense of community, knowing that we get farther together and building together makes this a better product. And so when we're welcoming people onto the team, we want to make sure that they feel like they are part of the team. So we're in an interesting position where Joe was starting right end of the year, and I was trying to think of stuff to get for Hampton and Brittany, who'd been here a little longer. I was like, well, I got to get Joe the same stuff. Like, that would be really weird if I gave them their gifts a week ago before he started, right? And so we made sure to have him with a nice, like, backpack that's embroidered with the company logo. He's got his company t-shirt and a company coffee mug, or tea if you're like me and Brittany. Me and Brittany are the tea drinkers on the team. And then because it was the holidays and the team did so well, I mean, we ended up doing, 287% of our revenue in 2018 for this year. And so I wanted to reward them. And so I got them these really nice Ember coffee mugs that keep their coffee hot. They love coffee and they drink all the time. And so it's like, okay, you set the temperature and it's that temperature the entire time. And then because of the travel that we're doing, not only with me being remote in Austin and coming back and forth a little, but we've got customers in California or different parts of the United States or in Estonia. I was like, you guys need to travel. Make sure you have your stuff. So we got them these nice away bags that a good friend of mine, Amber, recommended. And so she's a huge advocate. And so Joe's first day is like yesterday, and he gets a brand new Mac and a monitor. And then on day 2, I fly in and I give them their holiday and their Christmas gifts, and they get a t-shirt, and we're going out to a nice local restaurant for dinner at Rick Irwin's. And so for me, I think it's really important for them to know, like, unequivocally, without a doubt, how much I appreciate them. And as a CEO, my job is super easy in that my only job is to make sure I remove barriers and obstacles out of their way. And so if one of those obstacles is the type of monitor you're using or your computer, like, that's easy. But then the harder part is making sure you show them how much you value them. Yeah. And so even through the application process, Hampton was really explicit. He's the CTO. These are 2 software engineers. He's like, look, in 2 years, I don't want you to be junior engineers anymore. And if in 2 years you decide you all want to go be, a senior level developer somewhere else, like, I want to make sure you have the skill set to do that. And so we want to invest in you in that way. And it's great that he and I have that same, like, philosophy on evaluating of people. There's always this thing that goes around on LinkedIn where, one person in the company says, what if we invest in our employees and they leave? And then the other person says, well, what if we don't invest in them and they stay? And so it's like, I think about that as like, how do you pour into your team to where they know, man, if I wasn't here tomorrow, they would really care that I wasn't here. And so, when we talked with Joe about where he left from, it's like, I left this company that I, was previously at because I wasn't sure if I was ever really needed. And now he knows that, like, every line of code he writes is he's the person who wrote it. Right. And that really helps us, I think, build true evangelists. We actually had a couple of people, obviously you can't hire everyone. We had a couple of people who appreciated the process so much. 2 of them have asked me to review their resume and their cover letters for other jobs that they've applied for, and one of them has gotten the job. Oh, awesome. And I gave a referral to them because I said, look, I really like the person. They didn't fit at the time where we were at, but they think they'd be great. Mm-hmm. And they got a job. And so I think that that's the kind of thing where it's just like, and who knows, maybe that person comes back and they're a CTO in 5 years or 10 years. Right. You just never know. And so that's why the grace piece is so extremely important to me.
Oh, so important. Thank you so much, Harold.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sticking around.
Oh, for sure.
The session with me about hiring. This has been amazing.
Well, I think that, as a Black founder, I've said it, more recently now that I've been sharing these stories more, is that the transformative power of transparent storytelling is incredibly important, not only in startup overall, but specifically for underrepresented people. We often see these success stories where you're just like, how did they get there? Mm-hmm. And the story is, if you work really hard or if you show up every day.
That's right.
And often, man, sometimes it's a lot of luck. Sometimes it's a person taking a flyer on you and all that. But if you don't ever get that story, you think, man, I've been showing up every day. I've been working really hard and it hasn't paid off. What's happening? And so it's really trying to figure out, how do we do a better job, we being the people who have had these experiences, do a better job of sharing them so that people can say, wow, that was a pretty tough time. Harold, you had to sell your townhouse to fund your company a couple of years ago? Yeah, I did. Or so-and-so, you had to max out your credit cards, and you had, a good friend of mine said they had a couple $1,000s in the bank before they got hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment. Like, those are the stories I think are really important. And so when you have these types of stories being shared, I think that really allows not only your team members that you're recruiting from a hiring standpoint, but investors who are trying to figure out founders to back, and then entrepreneurs who are building great companies. That really, empowers the entire ecosystem. So
thank you so much, my friend.
Absolutely.
I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I did. I will drop some links in the show notes, including to your Twitter.
Yes, please.
post about all of this because I thought, gosh, this is so incredible that you were transparent even on Twitter about the highs and lows the whole time, too, I think.
Whole time.
Yeah. So be sure to check out the show notes below for more information about Harold, the hiring process, and Bandwagon Fanclub Incorporated.
Yep.
Be sure also to visit shantavia.com for more information about all of the questions you might have about building a brand, business, and life that you love. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Shantavia Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment wherever you're listening. You can find me on social media everywhere, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and wherever else, at Shantavia JESQ. You can also visit me at shantavia.com to find a transcript of this episode, along with other show notes. While you're there, please be sure to subscribe to my email newsletter. The information shared in this podcast and through my other platforms is designed to educate you about business and entrepreneurship, and I love to do this work. While I am a lawyer, though, the information I provide is not legal advice and does not create or constitute an attorney-client relationship. The Shantavia Show is a Leverage Incorporated original. The show is recorded on site in South Carolina and produced at Sit and Spin Studio in Greenville, South Carolina. Original music and sound design is by Matt Morgan and Daniel Gregory. Mixing and mastering is by Daniel Gregory. And the video is by GVL Media.